Welcome back to the Restoring Darkness podcast. This episode of the show, and every episode of the show, is brought to you by two amazing organizations. One of them is called softlights.org, and it is run by my co host, Mark Baker. And they have an amazing petition before the FDA right now about car headlights. So you want to go to softlights.org to find out more about that, but we want to get rid of those super laser beamy glary headlights, and I think the last time I checked, Scott had over 60 or 70,000 signatures on that particular. What would you call it, Mark? Is it a petition, right?
Yeah, change.org petition to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has over 60,000 signatures and 202 pages of comments talking about debilitating LED headlights.
Go to softlights.org to check that out. And the Lighting and Darkness Foundation, we are helping with light trespass disputes right now. We got a couple cases out there that can't talk about right now, but where we're using our knowledge as lighting industry professionals to help judges decide whether something's a light trespass or not. And if you want to support that work, you go to restoringdarkness.com, you click the donate link there on the website, and you can support our work. We also are creating a lighting, what's the right way to put it? We're creating a night preservation and darkness restoration educational program for frontline lighting practitioners. That's in the works, taking a long time. We need some more money. So if you want to donate to that, click the donate link and help us get started on that. Today's guest is Patrick Sommer. He has been a lifelong enthusiast for night sky space exploration, and in late 2019 translated that enthusiasm into an application to be a delegate for DarkSky International, or DarkSky, now known as DarkSky International, representing the organization in Fargo, North Dakota area. By 2020, he was working social media accounts, and as the world moved in and out of the pandemic restrictions, getting in front of local sustainability and astronomy clubs. Additionally, he has represented the now dominant Red River Valley Climate Action Committee, and presented information on light pollution to the City of Fargo's Sustainability and Resiliency Committee and the City of Moorhead's Street Light Subcommittee. Of late, he has been active with Starry Skies North, a conglomerate of dark sky enthusiasts and activists based in Duluth and Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm sure he spends a lot of time explaining to people that light pollution is pollution. Light trespass is trespass. And, that's been such a hurdle for this movement. And Patrick, how do you deal with that when you're in front of these people, letting them know it's not a metaphor?
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me on this episode. And it is a true honor to be here. Uh, to answer your question directly, that's one of the lead-ins now. One thing that I've learned over the last couple of years is how you frame this issue is important. At the beginning of my advocacy work and presentation work, I kind of went with the original arguments for that founded the International Dark Sky Association, astronomy, animal life, the ecosystems, which are all critical issues. But depending upon your audience, you can either capture their attention or you can start seeing some of them either nod off or just glaze over. Now, that light trespass issue that you've mentioned, as well as the human health component, is the attention getter. That's more what I lead with now, depending upon who I'm talking to. But if I'm going in front of city officials, if I'm going in front of a general audience, it really is trespass as a potential legal matter, as a potential neighborhood community issue, and then human health. That does get people's attention, and there's a growing body of evidence that points to not necessarily LEDs, with a few exceptions, as being a cause, primary cause, being a factor that can contribute to a lot of problems. So those are the entry arguments that I've been going with right now. And they do seem to get people's attention and get them to at least listen to the rest of the reasons why light pollution is a problem.
And what are those reasons?
Uh, well, again, human health. There's a growing host of evidence that suggests that light pollution exposure to the blue light part of the spectrum at night interrupts circadian rhythms. Uh, Essentially, it's disrupting our circadian system where we evolved as a diurnal creature. We need daytime and we need nighttime just as badly, if not more so, to rest and recuperate.
Mm.
And without that full cycle of rest and recuperation, it interferes with a lot of bodily processes that go into protecting ourselves from a host of problems: diabetes, cancers, uh, mental health disorders. You've heard a long list of these issues before on this podcast and out there in the media and the research, but it is vital. Uh, Without that full cycle of rest and recuperation, you're not going to be prepared for the next day. And that can lead to a lot of health issues. In addition, another piece of the puzzle here locally that does get people's attention is the energy waste argument. Not so much as part of the overall climate change debate and issue, which is important, but pocketbook. If you're talking about just saving people money, saving the cities money, yes, the LED transition has saved a lot of cash for a lot of cities out there, but control systems have the potential to save them even more. And getting neighborhood groups, your individual neighbors, to understand that even with an LED fixture and bulb outside, if they just turn those off for a good portion of the night, they are going to save a little bit more cash. That's another one. There are safety issues as well. The petition on change.org, which I still need to sign, doesn't just apply, at least to me, to headlights, but also streetlights. There are a lot of streetlight
Mm.
issues in our local area and all across the country in major urban cities where you might have a 4 or 5,000 Kelvin fixture on that streetlight, and that doesn't help necessarily when you're driving down a busy street. And then, of course, there are all the ecological issues. Yes, we are contributing to habitat loss, species and biodiversity loss with nighttime disruption of their ecosystems based on lighting. Insects, small mammals, birds all depend on a dark and quiet night to survive. That's the main arguments that I incorporate into it, along with a loss of a sense of awe and wonder that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to go out and experience anymore. It's tough to travel. One thing that we used to all share was going out and looking up at the Milky Way or the night
Mm.
sky and seeing an unblemished view of the auroras or a
Mm.
meteor shower. And it's harder to do in an urban environment, even a small community like Fargo Moorhead.
It's interesting that you've covered a lot there. But how do you
That
battle
basically
Miss
gave you my elevator pitch.
Yeah. How do you deal with Mr. Strawman? And Mr. Strawman argument is that, hey, you know what? More light equals more safety, and we know from recent episodes of this show that actually that's not proven. That more light equals more safety. And how do you deal with that when that comes up?
Uh, as you have on your show over time, it's basically, or explain, it's basically neither a cause or an effect of lighting. It's an independent issue that lighting can either help sometimes or hurt sometimes. And in that safety argument, there's several different components of it. A lot of it's personal safety, whether you're out at night, the feeling that someone might have for their personal security. It's residential home security. Uh, I'm on Nextdoor as an app, and I get shot down when I try to be an advocate there. But I've lost track of the number of people that light up their front and backyards like it's a stadium, and then put a ring camera in trying to catch anybody that's walking down the sidewalk and alert them as a possible threat to their home security.
Mm.
Uh, and also, there's the traffic issue, and we have an aging population, and lights to the level we've illuminated a lot of our cities and thoroughfares contribute to more harm from growing number or amount of evidence than benefit. Glare is a serious issue. Macular degeneration is an issue that exposure to too much light at night is contributing to, perhaps. And I'm not so sure anymore that simply washing our main thoroughfares in as brilliant white light as possible is the safest thing to do with an aging population driving at night. but it is a hard argument to get across. Local officials, from police to city council members, frequently the first thing they think of is if you're trying to turn out the lights, you're going to create a less safe environment in any one of those categories. And it's more psychological and factual, and it is hard to overcome unless you have concrete data. And there's just not a lot of data out there that shows in many neighborhoods. Well, they put in 4,000 K streetlights and crime either went up or didn't change.
Mm.
Uh, we need to try to get out there and measure the lights, correlate that to crime data, and see what the results are. But at my stage of the game, I haven't done a definitive study like that yet.
Well, Dr. Phil Edwards did, and we haven't released that
Yes.
podcast yet, Scott, if I'm correct. I know you did some social media on it, but the podcast hasn't been released yet. And he has said that it makes no difference. He tracked the lighting in hundreds of counties or whatever they call them over in the UK, and changing the lights or not having the lights made no change to crime, incidences of crime, or pedestrian accidents due to lighting differences. And he had mentioned to us that this study could be replicated very easily anywhere in the United States or Canada using municipal and police officer data or police accident data can show this. But Mr. Strawman's tough to beat. And so what it's interesting,
It is.
Patrick. I've been reading, and before I turn it over to Mark, oh my gosh, we're already at 11 minutes. Before I turn it over to Mark here for some questioning, I would say that I've been reading neuroscience books on looking through them, trying to find why humans are afraid of the dark, and all of them reference children. And so I've read excerpts from a couple different neuroscience books, and they all say when you take a child into the forest at night, they're scared because they're not sure what's there. But I think we need to remove the word child. Like all of these books were talking about the rationality of being afraid of the dark, and the children are irrational in the forest because actually being in the forest at night's kind of scary sometimes. I agree with that. So I have a flashlight, but the this idea pervades our society that somehow if we wash everything in high Kelvin temperature light, everything will be safer. But actually, I think the opposite is true, Patrick.
I would agree with that. Everything I've read, and let me backtrack a little bit. Uh, as I do in front of all of my presentations and before I talk to anybody on this subject, I come out right out and I say, I'm not a lighting expert like you are. I'm not in the industry. I'm not a biologist. I'm not an engineer. I'm not even an astronomer. I might be an amateur astronomer, but I am just a simple, concerned person that is looking at the evidence and what has happened to our health and ecospheres. And I've decided that the nighttime is a worthy focus. It's one of those bridge too fars, in my opinion. Without a healthy, dark, and quiet night, the rest of our existence is at risk, at least on the day to day healthy level. But yes, there has been so much written from all of the recent books I've read. They all at least include a portion or a whole chapter on the psychology of the night and our fear at a very root level of the dark. And that's also occasionally hard to overcome.
Well, Patrick, thanks for being on this show. And what all the words that you used there, I didn't hear anything that I disagreed with. You're very knowledgeable, and we've been trying to promote that same message at the Soft Lights Foundation that you're out there doing. So thank you very much for all of that. To Michael's point about fear, yesterday I was at a state historic park in California, and so there was a farmhouse there built around 1850 or so, and they had two outhouses, and there was a sign that explained how the outhouses work, and it described how scary it was to go from your house trying to, I mean, there's brilliant stars above, but the scary factor to get out to the outhouse and do your thing and come back, there is a consciousness, and that's been there for thousands and thousands of years, right? So so suddenly we have electric light, and we're excited, and we now that fear is sort of alleviated, and yet now we've gone too far. It's just too much light. Now we have sort of we have ruined things. Um, just, I would like to touch on a case that just occurred that you may or may not be aware of. So, in the United Kingdom, Sasha Rodoy sued the town of Barnet, or really it's a suburb of London, and it went on for 4 years, and they settled their case. And she had an LED streetlight outside of her house. It was 4,000 Kelvin. It was really devastating to her sleep, as you mentioned, and it was really impairing her ability to recover, as you say. So the outcome is that they settled. They settled for 2,200 Kelvin. It's a legal agreement. It's made some pretty good news in the United Kingdom. And so I'm wondering, has the Dark Sky International, has it talked about it? Have you talked about the color temperature? There is an issue with Dark Sky International having two values, 3,000 Kelvin and 2,200 K, both on their website, which is causing some issues within the membership. I'm wondering if you could speak to that, if you've heard any news or anybody talks about color temperature.
They do. I'm not high enough up the dark sky food chain to be a decision point in what they post online, but I do acknowledge that there has been some discussion amongst advocates and delegates and chapters about what is the right Kelvin and right color temperature to put out there. Uh, there's also a lot of confusion in cities and municipalities about what is the best option, which is why I've started really to hone back in on the argument for controls. If you can shift your lighting pattern to whatever need you might have, whether it's full on 100% bright white, if you have an emergency situation, to a nice soft yellow 2200 to 2500 for the rest of the evening, that might be your best bet. But there is a lot of confusion out there. Our local cities, Fargo and North Dakota on the other side, Moorhead, Minnesota, are in practice when they put a new LED in now, usually maintaining, at least in the residential areas, uh, 3,000 or lower. But it's hit and miss. It's not codified in a law or an ordinance. It's just a practice. That's my current push is to get them to at least put that down for city-owned and run systems. Thou shalt install 2,700 or less. I haven't advocated yet for 22, but there is receptivity for 2,700. But yeah, there is a lot of misconceptions out there about what's the best. Starry Skies North, which, as my bio says, is a large conglomeration of states, delegates, chapters. Todd Burlett was on this show a while back. Um, they and a few other organizations are advocating for the term wildlife friendly nights or lighting, which is generally 2,700 or lower. Um, that's kind of where I'm at, is 2,700. But again, I usually lead with human health at this point to get the attention. Um, it's not really a complex issue for me. We just have to decide what that standard is going to be and stick with it. Um, and if you go with a controllable system, you can have the best of all worlds, I think. And that's a economic point too, where you can save money by dialing it down. You've got a business proposition if you're marketing those control systems, so your local businesses might be in for a windfall, um, and you really can both protect safety and protect the rest of the nighttime ecosystem out there, make it a more enjoyable and safe place to live.
One of the problems we have in general, not just in the lighting industry, is with metrics. And when we deploy these metrics, like for example, what is the temperature outside? Right? And so you watch the news and you live in Fargo, North Dakota, or whatever. It's like, what's the wind chill? What's the humidity?
Yeah,
Right? Like, how do you tell people how it actually feels outside? Right? How windy is it? All
right.
these different metrics that we use, and they're not really accurate. How hot is it? How humidity, what's the humidity scale? We have these like bizarre things trying to combine metrics. I believe nanometers is the best way to go when it comes to uh, indicating what wavelength a lighting system should be. So even if something measures a certain Kelvin temperature, it may not be delivering the wavelengths necessary. That can be done with shielding, different types of glosses, or I can't remember what the term they use in the industry is. I would remember if I sat back and thought about it for a bit, but coating different things in colors and all this sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's time to step back and say we don't really know actually. And I think we're at that place. And if anybody comes out with a certification or a something that says this is, good for this, they need to be very careful and be ready to adjust that, because this color temperature measurement is not really what we're after. We're after some other indications, and those things can only be created by human lighting designers, right? When they're creating a lighting system. And so I want to be very wary to the industry and those listening that while we probably can do a lot of good, and we should continue to do a lot of good using what we know now. I think it's important, Patrick, to remember that these things need to be very, very loose and adjustable as we discover more and more about the moths and the bats and the turtles and the all the different wildlife that's out there, and then really come to understand lighting better and how it impacts people. And only lighting designers can do that, not lighting fixtures. Lighting fixtures will never be able to create a system that is able to protect these things. And yes, I'm an advocate for lighting controls, and I believe the best place for lighting controls is in outdoor municipal street lighting, although very little amounts of the research go there. But I think that's the best place. How do we get out of this trap of the wrong metrics with the lighting industry kind of fighting to keep the Kelvin temperature high? Like that's what happens. The lighting industry wants the Kelvin temperature high,
It does.
and it's like holding us back or something. I'm in the lighting industry. I'm pissed off at my colleagues. How do we go talk to the lighting industry? I've been doing it for years on this show, but no one seems to be able to really be receptive to that message.
In my limited experience, it's not just the lighting industry. And locally, I haven't had as much interaction as I have with that portion of business as occasionally with the utilities industry. The electric providers and generators were all on board with the LED transition, but they too have an interest in keeping those kelvins higher and keeping the overall electric use higher overnight. And if you dial it back, you're going to lose electric usage factors for them, which eventually means revenue. That is also a big hurdle to overcome. Your points on deciding on what metric to use, I haven't done a lot of reading on nanometers, and again, I'm not an engineer, but some of the more receptive audiences I've talked to for the past 2 years, I've been invited to speak to an entry 100 level architecture class at North Dakota State University. And they are just getting into how to design the exteriors of buildings. And I've been talking to them about lighting concerns, mostly with making sure it's shielded, directed the right amount for the right amount of light in the right place for the right time, and how to design something that'll keep your building beautiful without doing any harm. They are by far the most open, the lighting designers, to listening and then incorporating that into what they're going to do. Um, but yeah, it's a tough fight, and if you guys ever find out the answer, I'll gladly listen to that episode because it is a challenge to figure out what metric is going to work best for everybody, and there is that lack of metric.
Well, the lighting industry, Michael would like the lighting industry to solve the problem. He feels that they created the problem, but they're in the business of making money. The utility companies are in
Yes.
the business of making money. And so you made a suggestion that you've been promoting, which I thought was really fantastic, which is turn the light off. When I was a kid, my parents taught me, hey, you leave the room, flip that switch. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure if that was, I think that was to save money. But it was a habit that I
Yes.
built for sure. And so there's this human part of me that says, well, if I'm not using the light, turn it off. I wasn't aware of, well, it's impacting the turtles or the moss or anything else. It's just, I'm not in the room, so turn it off. So it's a little bit weird that we have all this light out lighting up streets, for example, when there's not a single person or a single car on the road. what's the receptivity that you're getting? Let's say, for example, have you suggested a curfew? Not all lights off, but let's say some places have this. Let's say 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew. What's the receptivity from the different organizations that you're talking to turning the lights off?
Most of the organizations that I actually present to and talk directly with would be receptive to that. A lot of sustainability clubs, that architecture class, astronomy clubs. At the club organization level, they don't necessarily have a problem with that. Audubon chapters, Dark Sky has a relationship with them, and I've talked to them before. And obviously, with the bird migrations and lights out projects, they are all for that. However, again, it comes back to framing and knowing your local audience a bit. My neck of the woods is we're a fossil fuel state. We are kind of anti regulatory in the general population. So if you go out there and introduce, as was it Boulder, I think recently, started tasking people to turn off or pull the curtains on their interior lighting so that they're not shining out their $1 million homes. If you start introducing regulations like that, you might get some pushback. It's going to have to be, at least I think where I'm at, a lot of continued education efforts, those habits that you might have developed as a kid to turn the lights off behind you. I wish my parents had done that. I was turning off the lights behind them every room I went through. Um, but there are so many examples, even on my street, where their garage porch light, their exterior backyard light is on 24/7. And I've seen comments about, oh, we should go by to the big box stores and buy these 24/7 constant lights. They have solar kits. We're saving energy. But the lights are on all night long and they're in bed. And nobody's walking down the street needing their house light. They have a street light for that. Um, Energy savings and light trespass is going to be kind of a way to combat that, I feel, at least where I'm at geographically and, to be honest, politically. The regulatory argument will work if you're looking at city managed systems. If you're getting into people's yards, you're going to have to use a different tactic.
I'm a little bit.
The light.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Mark. No, I'm taking my notes here.
Oh, okay. All right.
Mhm.
Well, I wanted this light trespass issue is a big deal. The Soft Lights Foundation is
Yes.
involved in multiple light trespass issues, which really wasn't an issue, as Michael would say, before LEDs. LEDs are so intense. And
Mhm.
so we're now exploring this concept. So it's interesting to hear you talk about it as well, that it's coming up, the legal idea that I'm calling it a light trespass nuisance, but that's not a standardized thing necessarily. It's a nuisance because the legal actions that we're involved in, that's kind of what the courts understand is a nuisance. Trespass is more of a physical thing to them. But
Right.
I've seen that phrase, that term, light trespass often, and now people are responding to, hey, this neighbor is blasting me. What can I do about it? Are there any actions that you're involved in? Any kind of legal things that are in the works regarding this light trespass?
Not individual cases here locally, although when I do present, a large number of people that pick up and perk up their ears at that mention tend to be apartment dwellers, which, if they're in a more of a communal living center type of arrangement rather than the residential street homes, they are typically subjected not just to street lights, but business lighting and signage lighting that might be out there. And there are fewer avenues of recourse if you're in an apartment. And the apartment's own lighting can be a problem. If you're in a third floor unit and the apartment's got their exterior lightings right above your windows, that's going to be an issue for them. So a lot of it is designed, at least what I give them is designed to help them go to apartment management and then maybe go to the city. And eventually, when Fargo and Moorhead and hopefully the rest of our towns nearby do adopt some actual ordinances that deal with luminosities and trespass issues, that will be part of it. We'll be making sure that there's something devoted to being a good neighbor. making sure that your light isn't providing a nuisance to others. Right now, there really isn't any language, so we're at ground level in my area in terms of light pollution and nighttime systems in general. Very ground level. Uh, like just opening up the discussions to having some sort of a legal protection for the city, for business owners, that they don't get embroiled in something like what your entities have been mediating of late.
I just got an email while looking at this. I haven't read it yet, but it's from one of the lawyers in one of these disputes. It's going to be interesting to see. But people don't like to be told what to do. This is the fundamental
Right.
problem, particularly Americans. Um, they don't like to be told what to do. And you see this very clearly in the if you read the correspondence between the Lighting and Darkness Foundation and the plaintiffs and defendants in these disputes. You see that the fundamental problem is like this idea of liberty or freedom. Very big problem vis-a-vis light pollution. Now we've gotten out of our heads that you
Yes.
don't have the freedom to dump toxic waste into a river. I think people have all accepted that, as just because you're free or you have liberty or whatever it is you're talking about,
Right.
doesn't mean you can dump, garbage into the river. We need to move light pollution into that area where just, so if you guys talked about light switches. My kids have never turned a light off in their life because my whole home is on lighting controls. The lights turn off automatically when they leave the house. My outdoor
Mm-hmm.
lighting is on lighting controls on the inside of my house. So it sees when people are moving at night on the inside of my house and turns the lights on. And there's a little timer there. If one of my kids is out late, my wife can push 2, 3, 4 hours to leave some light on so when they could drive their car up the driveway and come home. But it's all shielded and down and all this sort of thing. So there's many reasons why technologically this is not a problem to fix. We do need to figure out the nanometers or the Kelvin temperature, whatever the metric is correctly, shield things. But the technology exists to solve the problem. Is DarkSky International best positioned? Who do they represent? Like, if I'm asking you that question, do they represent astronomers? Do they represent science? Do they represent research? Who is DarkSky actually representing?
Again, remember, I'm not that high up the food chain.
Okay, sorry.
Uh,
We don't have you don't
but
have to answer that question. I'll call Ruskin. I'll text
no,
him
no,
and ask
no,
him or
no.
something.
Yeah, he'd have the answer right there. Uh, we're all aware of their history, their
Sure.
foundational history as an entity. It did definitively stem from astronomy and scientific applications. There in the Southwest, where we still have some good, solid, large scale observatories out there, and they were on the verge of being unusable because of growing light pollution. And IDA formed at its very beginning out of a response to maintain dark
Mm-hmm.
skies for astronomy and science purposes. That's that's in their on their website basically. Now they are, of course, a large international entity, and a lot of their first few decades of existence have been at this educational level, have been where they've been trying to tell people that light pollution is a problem, not just for astronomy, but growing evidence of this and that health, um, ecosystem impacts, the problems with the sea turtles were the first poster children for light pollution, and now birds and bats and the insect apocalypse. All of that is adding on to the growing course of research that light pollution is an issue. As for who they currently represent, um, as with a lot of other global sized nonprofits, it can be tough for a person individually at a local level like here to say that they are looking out for your freedom loving, liberty loving, American, as you so pointed out, individual best interests. I need to frame it so that it's not a nonprofit from afar trying to wiggle in the affairs of
Mm-hmm.
local Fargo, North Dakotans.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that we have resources, we have information that can help make your life better if you follow a few simple tools and tips. And not that we're going to try to force you. There's a phrase that I'm sure you've heard on the show before. We're not trying to create a dark city. We're not trying to turn off all of the lights. We're just trying to make sure that they're used appropriately. And that is what I'm doing here too. Just trying to make sure that lights aren't shining up out in your face, and that we preferably don't leave them on all night long for other reasons besides the light pollution health issues, the energy wastes, and the other climate change potential aspects of it that I do care about as well. Uh, but yeah, IDA and now Dark Sky, it can be tough to frame them as helping you at the local level. And I'm just a delegate. North Dakota doesn't have a chapter yet.
Mm.
That's one of my next steps. But when you get into states that are more active, obviously the southwestern states, Minnesota, um, there's great work being done in Pittsburgh and
Mm.
Michigan, all over the place. But
Mm.
they have chapters. They have organizations that are doing more events, more membership, more revenue. I'm not there yet, so I'm just going out there and telling people who we are, what we represent, but we're not going to try to make you and force you do anything at this point. And that's a way to at least get our attention, and show that Dark Sky is not another environmental group trying to force change on them that they may or may not want to listen to.
Regulation has its limits anyway. I mean, most
Mm-hmm.
regulations are not enforced. So
Right.
even if you do pass a
And that would
regulation,
include,
an ordinance or whatever, I mean, who's going to go around and check?
yeah,
I mean, there's no lighting police.
right. And
Um,
nope.
so yeah,
And even
what
a lot of nunuisance laws and ordinances that exist don't get enforced.
you
We're
got to
having a
blow the
big
dust
local
off
debate
them.
right now about noise. Yeah, we're having a huge debate right now locally about noise ordinances and how they haven't been enforced over the years, and they're talking about making them tougher, at least in the downtown core. But will that actually mean things get quieter at night or during the day? Probably not, unless they start enforcing them or craft an ordinance or regulation that people will listen to because it works for them, not just somebody else.
Before we go to Mark here, just quickly, I would say that the only way out of this is to make it cool. You have to remove the conspicuousness of the consumption of lighting at night on rich people's
Yes.
homes and in cities. There's an element of it that, people want to have their homes illuminated to show what a big shot they are. They have I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the soffit lighting and the landscape lighting and all this kind of stuff. It's actually really gross. Like it's grotesque when you see it. If once you take the scales off your eyes and stop thinking this guy's richer than that guy's richer than this guy, he's got a Lamborghini, this guy doesn't. As soon as we take away that those scales off our eyes and we see like it's disgusting at 3 in the morning to see somebody's house lit up like it's Christmas. You know what I'm saying? Over to you. Over to you, Mark.
Oh, I agree with you. I just wanted to point out that the Soft Lights Foundation has something similar to Dark Sky International. We have our proposed simple lighting ordinances that city could adopt. What I put on there is the last step was the enforcement part because that gets dropped all the time. And our
Right.
experiences with code enforcement is, well, I don't work at nighttime, so I don't know. I can't see it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't go out at night. So what I put in there was that any neighbor could take a photograph at night and submit it to code enforcement, and that would initiate the code enforcement action. And that's not to really pit neighbor to neighbor, but I've been experiencing a lot of neighbors that are really, really upset with this light trespass stuff. So they would like to get their
Yeah.
neighbors to turn that light off. And so just taking a photo with your cell phone camera, submitting it at code enforcement, and then initiating that action. And if they have it fully shielded, low color
Yeah, but we
temperature,
don't want to be
and
snitches, man. There's like the you know what I mean? Like
we're,
I'm
we're,
actually I'm
we're
in this thing with these neighbors and these disputes. And there's something about it where it's like, we have to make it cool. We have to find a way, Patrick. We have to find a way to make this issue, darkness restoration and night preservation. And when I say that, those are two different things. And, I think that
Yes.
while I love the work Dark Sky does, I find the term dark sky a little bit difficult for people to understand what you're talking about. When we talk about darkness restoration, we're talking about in our light polluted environments like the city of Toronto, the city of Minneapolis, the city of New York, whatever. We're talking about night preservation. We're talking about the rest of North Dakota, which is probably largely
Oh yeah,
all dark skies right now, or night preserved,
it
whatever term
largely
you want to
is.
use. Yeah. Any final thoughts?
Your background, though, oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I was gonna bring it
My
back
background?
to your discussion on no. Your background of your Zoom or
Yeah,
whatever
sure.
we're on here with the lake and the night sky. At a recent presentation that I did, one of the guests there came up and said, you know, my folks have a lake place, and a lake place is a huge deal up in this neck of the woods. Everybody in Minneapolis goes to the lake. Everybody in Fargo goes to the lake on the weekends. And there is a growing sentiment with a lot of longtime lake place goers, Northern Lake folks that have had places up there for decades, that the newer houses and the newer facilities on those outdoor recreation hotspots are all lit up all night long
Mm-hmm.
with the outdoor spots and the brilliant banks of windows emanating their interior lights out. And it does cause some concern even amongst the regular, not worried about light pollution normally folks, because all of a sudden their pristine view of a night sky is hurt. Their loons might be impacted by light pollution. The fishing might be impacted by light pollution. Um, and just that term, light pollution, though, brings them back to what they feel is an urban city problem.
Mm.
So restoring darkness is a better term. Uh, Darkness preservation is a better term. Uh, I'm actually went down a rabbit hole the last couple of months of school where noise is starting to become an issue for my internal brain set as much as light is at night. So I'm pushing for dark and quiet nights nowadays. But yeah, it again, it comes back to how I frame it and how we all frame the discussion, and it's not strictly light pollution. It's making sure that your nighttime environment and your dark environment is closer to what we've experienced for centuries, not just the past 50, 60 years in a lot of our cities.
I would say the last 10 years it's gone exponentially worse.
Oh,
But the
much worse,
light and
yes.
sound pollution go together. The two are, they're not the
They
same
do.
thing, but they are definitely correlated with one another. And there's a sense in which we need to establish a certain amount of tranquility to our environments. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about turning the lights off and lowering the sound. So if you're thinking about tranquility,
Yep.
you want quiet and darkness. That's what brings tranquility at night. Folks, if you've listened to this all the way through, we're past 42 minutes here. I can't believe it, how fast this show goes, Mark Baker. Can you believe it? Before you know it, we're come to 40 minutes here, and we try to keep them tight for you guys. Before you go, I want you to check out the Soft Lights Foundation. Um, I mean, look, he's doing great work down there. He wants everything to go back to low pressure sodium. I keep telling him it's never going to happen, but keep up the great work, Mark Baker, on the softlights.org. We can get better with LEDs, and if you want to support this show, or you want to support some of the other work we're doing with respect to light trespass and using our lighting skills to photometrically show light trespass to judges, to using drones to fly above these properties at night to show how much brighter this one place is in comparison to all the neighboring properties around it. I mean, all this stuff costs money, folks. So you go to restoringdarkness.com, you click the donate link, and you can help us out there. But the drone work, I think, is going to be the winner on some of these cases, especially, I'm not going to say anything about which ones we're working on, but the ones we got, I think the drone work is really going to show how ridiculous some of this light pollution is. And I've said it for a long time, Mark, on this show, that we're doing our exterior lighting to be seen from above, not to be lived in or driven through or walked by or anything like that. If you want to see a highway, look at it from above. You'll see everything perfectly because it's been lit up to be seen from above. And so the Lighting and Darkness Foundation purchased a drone. Go to restoringdarkness.com. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.